There is a lesson I have been carrying for most of my adult life, a lesson that did not come from a book, did not come from a seminary, did not come from years of personal study, although I have done all of those things. It came from watching a man, from sitting close enough to observe how he prayed, how he waited, how he responded when heaven seemed to say nothing in return for his most fervent asking. And I want to give you that lesson today, not as a theological argument, not as a list of principles to memorize and apply, but as something living, the way it was given to me, through story, through example, through the kind of truth that can only be transmitted by watching someone walk through something real. The man I am speaking about is Dr. David Yonggi Cho, and what he taught me about unanswered prayer changed everything I thought I understood about the relationship between faith and waiting, between asking and receiving, between the silence of God and the faithfulness of God. I want to begin with the first time I truly understood what Dr. Cho meant when he said something that seemed on the surface almost too simple to hold any weight. He said, "The most powerful prayer is not the prayer that gets an immediate answer. It is the prayer that keeps you faithful until the answer comes." I heard him say that in a room full of people, and I remember watching the audience receive it the way most of us receive a sentence that sounds profound but does not yet have a place to land inside us. We nodded, we wrote it down, and then we went home and prayed the way we had always prayed, hoping for answers the way we had always hoped, measuring God's faithfulness by the speed of his response, the way we had always measured it. It took me years to understand that what he had said was not a comfort to people in waiting. It was a diagnosis. He had seen something in the way most believers approach unanswered prayer that he knew, from his own experience, was costing them something they could not afford to lose. To understand what Dr. Cho taught me, you have to understand something about where he came from. He did not arrive at his theology of prayer from a place of comfort or ease. He arrived at it through a childhood of poverty so severe that hunger was not an occasional visitor in his home but a permanent resident. He arrived at it through a young adulthood marked by illness so serious that the medical community had given up on his survival. He arrived at it through the early years of a ministry that grew so slowly, in such difficult conditions, in a country still raw from the devastation of war, that most people watching from the outside would have been forgiven for concluding that either God had made a mistake in calling this particular young man, or that the young man had made a mistake in believing he had been called at all. Dr. Cho arrived at his understanding of unanswered prayer not by reading about it but by living inside it for years, with no guarantee that the silence would ever end. And this is the first thing he taught me about unanswered prayer, though he taught it not through words but through the testimony of his own life. He taught me that the character of your prayer life is not revealed when God answers quickly. It is revealed when he does not. Anyone can maintain faith for a week, for a month, even for a season. The question that Dr. Cho's life poses to every believer is this: can you maintain faith for years in the middle of real suffering, in the middle of real need, without certainty that the answer is coming, and without a timetable to hold on to? That is the prayer life he developed, not because he chose it as a spiritual discipline, but because his circumstances demanded it. And what emerged from those years of demanding, unanswered, painful, persistent prayer was not bitterness. It was not the kind of wounded faith that eventually collapses under its own weight. What emerged was something I have never seen in anyone who came to faith easily and received answers quickly. What emerged was a confidence in God so deep and so unshakable that it was to those of us who witnessed it almost frightening in its steadiness. I remember being in a meeting where someone brought a question to Dr. Cho that I know many of you have asked in your own hearts, perhaps never out loud, perhaps only in the dark of your own thoughts when no one else could hear. The person asked, "What do you do when you have prayed for something for years and nothing has changed?" I remember the room going quiet in the way rooms go quiet, when a question has been asked that everyone in the space has secretly been waiting for someone else to ask first. And I remember Dr. Dr. Cho being quiet for a moment himself, not the quiet of someone searching for an answer, but the quiet of someone deciding which part of a very large answer to give first. And then he said something I have never forgotten. He said, you do what I did. You pray it again. And then you get up and you go do the work that is in front of you today. And you trust that God is doing the work that is in front of him today, which is the work you cannot see. That answer was not what most people in that room were hoping for. Most people in most rooms are hoping to be told that there is something they have not yet tried. Some prayer technique, some level of faith they have not yet accessed. Some key they are missing that, once found, will unlock the door that has been closed. Dr. Cho's answer refused that hope, not cruelly but honesty. He was saying something that his entire life had taught him. There is no secret key. There is only faithful, persistent, humble prayer, combined with faithful, persistent, humble work, combined with the kind of trust in God's character that does not require God to explain himself before you give him your continued faith. I want to tell you about a specific season in Dr. Cho's ministry that I believe holds the clearest illustration of what he taught me, because it is a season that most people who know of him have never heard about. The years before the breakthrough, the years that happened in such obscurity that they left almost no record except in the memories of the people who lived through them with him. In the earliest years of the church that would later become one of the largest congregations in the world, Dr. Cho was not preaching to thousands. He was preaching to dozens, sometimes to fewer than dozens. He was meeting in a tent, in a poor neighborhood, with people who had very little to give and very little reason, from a worldly perspective, to be hopeful about the future. He was praying for growth that did not come on any timetable he would have chosen. He was praying for resources that arrived, when they arrived at all, in amounts so small they seemed almost like a provocation compared to the scale of the need. He was praying for the people under his care to be healed, to be provided for, to be lifted out of poverty and suffering, and watching those prayers be answered sometimes, but slowly, and sometimes not at all in the way he had asked. And through all of those years, through all of that slow, difficult, unspectacular ministry, he kept praying. Not because he always felt like praying, not because every prayer session was filled with the sense of God's presence and the certainty of answered prayer coming soon. He kept praying because he had decided, at some point early in those difficult years, that his prayer life was not going to be dependent on his feelings about it or his results from it. He had decided that prayer was not a transaction he was entering into with God, where his input of faith and words and time would reliably produce God's output of specific answers on his preferred timetable. He had decided that prayer was something else entirely. Prayer, as Dr. Cho lived it, and eventually taught it, was the maintenance of a relationship. It was the keeping open of a line of communication between a human being and the God who made that human being, regardless of what was being communicated through that line in either direction, regardless of whether the communication felt productive or fruitful or even real on any given day. This is the second thing he taught me about unanswered prayer, and it is perhaps the most counterintuitive of all the things he gave me, because it runs directly against the way most of us have been taught to understand prayer. We have been taught, most of us consciously or not, that prayer is primarily a mechanism for getting things from God. We pray because we want something. We believe we can receive it through prayer, and we measure the success of our prayer life by how often we receive what we ask for. Dr. Cho never directly taught that this understanding of prayer was wrong, but he lived a corrective to it that was more powerful than any direct teaching could have been. He demonstrated through decades of ministry that the most important thing prayer does is not change the circumstances you are praying about. The most important thing prayer does is change the person who is praying. I watched this happen in him over many years of being close enough to observe it. The man who prayed through years of poverty was not the same man who eventually stood before thousands. He had been changed by the praying. changed in ways that I believe the early success he had prayed for would have actually prevented if it had come when he first asked for it. The patience he developed through years of waiting was not simply a spiritual virtue he had acquired. It was a practical equipment for the task ahead of him. A man who led a congregation of thousands without the patience forged in years of leading dozens would have been a disaster. The humility he developed through years of praying for things he did not receive would have been impossible to develop in a season of receiving everything he asked for on the schedule he preferred. What looked from the outside like God being slow to answer Dr. Cho's prayers was actually God being precise in preparing the person who would one day carry the answer. The third thing Dr. Cho taught me about unanswered prayer is connected to something he said once, that I have repeated to more people in more difficult seasons than almost anything else I have ever been given. He said, when God does not answer the prayer you are praying, it does not mean He is not answering prayer. It means He is answering a prayer you have not yet prayed, or prayer you would not even know to pray, one that is larger and deeper and more precisely fitted to your actual need than the specific thing you have been asking for. I want to sit with that for a moment because I think it contains something important for many of you who are listening right now, something that could shift the way you understand the silence you have been living inside. We pray, most of us, from the limited vantage point of what we can see. We pray for what we think we need, based on what we can see of our situation, our life, our future. And God answers from a vantage point that includes everything we cannot see. The full arc of our life, the needs we will have in 5 years that we cannot predict today, the people our life will touch in ways we cannot yet imagine, the purposes we carry, that will require specific qualities in us that can only be developed through specific kinds of waiting. When Dr. Cho prayed for his ministry to grow quickly in those early years, he was praying from what he could see. God was answering from what he could see. And what God could see was that a ministry that grew quickly would produce a leader who was not yet ready to lead it, and that a season of slow growth, of unanswered prayer for rapid expansion, would produce something in that leader that rapid expansion never could have produced. I think of a woman I know who prayed for years for a specific relationship to be restored, a relationship with a family member who had hurt her deeply and walked away without resolution. She prayed that prayer faithfully, week after week, year after year, and for a long time nothing changed. The relationship remained broken. The other person remained distant. And through those years of praying for reconciliation that did not come, something happened in her that she did not expect and did not initially welcome. She began to heal from the original wound in ways she had not previously been willing to heal, because she had been so focused on the external reconciliation that she had not attended to the internal one, the reconciliation with her own pain, her own grief, her own need to release what she had been carrying. God was not answering the prayer she was praying. He was answering the prayer she had not yet known to pray, the prayer for her own interior healing, which was actually the more foundational need. And when that healing had progressed far enough, when she was no longer holding the relationship with the kind of grip that comes from unhealed need, the external reconciliation she had been praying for finally began to move, quietly, tentatively, but genuinely, in ways that would not have been sustainable if they had come before the interior work was done. I think of a young man who prayed for years for financial provision, for a business breakthrough that would allow him to build the life he believed God had called him to build. He prayed specifically, he believed actively, he worked faithfully, and for years the breakthrough did not come. And through those years of praying for financial success that did not materialize, he was forced to develop skills, relationships, and character traits that he would not have developed if the money had come when he first asked for it. He learned in the lean years how to lead without resources, which turned out to be the most important leadership skill he would ever need. He learned in the lean years how to inspire people with vision rather than with compensation, which turned out to be the very quality that would later allow his business to attract the kind of people that money alone could never buy. God was not answering the prayer he was praying. He was answering every prayer that business would eventually need him to have prayed. The prayers for character, for resilience, for the specific kind of leadership that could only be forged in years of limited provision. The fourth thing Dr. Cho taught me about unanswered prayer is something I believe is the most personally costly and the most genuinely transformative. And it is this: there are some prayers God does not answer in the way we ask, because the way we are asking reveals something about us that still needs to change before the answer can come without destroying us. I want to be very careful here, because I know this truth can be twisted into a cruel and false accusation against people who are already suffering enough. People who do not need to be told that their unanswered prayer is their own fault. That is not what I am saying, and it is not what Dr. Cho taught. What Dr. Cho taught, through his own story and through his pastoral wisdom accumulated over decades, is something more nuanced and more compassionate than that. He taught that sometimes the specific form of what we are asking for reveals a deeper need that the thing itself cannot meet, and that God in his love refuses to give us the substitute when he wants to give us the actual thing. He told a story once about a man who prayed desperately for a particular position, a title, a role that he believed would finally make him feel significant and capable and valued. He prayed for it with sincere faith. He believed it was God's will, and it did not come. Year after year, he watched other people receive the recognition he had been praying for, and the bitterness that began to form in him through those years of apparent rejection was, Dr. Cho said, itself the evidence of why the prayer had not yet been answered. The man did not actually need the position. He needed the healing of the wound that had made the position feel so necessary. And God, in his faithfulness, was withholding the thing being asked for because giving it in that state would have reinforced the wound rather than healing it, would have built a life on a foundation of external validation that would eventually crack under the weight of its own instability. The position eventually came, Dr. Cho said, but it came to a different man than the one who had first prayed for it, a man who had been brought through the long years of waiting and the painful interior work. Those years had required to a place where he could hold the position without being defined by it, without needing it to tell him who he was. I want to speak now directly and personally to the specific prayers I believe many of you are carrying today, because I do not want what Dr. Cho taught me to remain abstract. He never allowed the things he understood to stay in the realm of theology when they had application in the realm of real life. And I want to honor that in the way I share them with you. If you are the person who has been praying for healing for a long time, for your own body or for someone you love, I want to give you the specific word that Dr. Cho gave more than once to people in exactly this situation. He said, do not let the length of the wait convince you that God has changed his mind about your healing. He said, the body is not the final word on what is possible, and the doctor's report is not the final word on what is written in heaven for your life. He said, keep praying, keep believing, and keep thanking God for the healing you are asking for as though it has already been released in the spiritual realm. Because faith, real faith, does not wait to see before it thanks. It thanks before it sees, because it knows that the one it is thanking is more certain than any evidence to the contrary. And I pass that on to you today with the same conviction he gave it to me. If you are the person who has been praying for a prodigal, for a child or a spouse or a sibling who has walked away from faith, from the family, from everything you built together, I want to give you the word Dr. Cho gave to the parents and the spouses and the siblings he walked with through exactly this kind of waiting. He said, your prayer for that person is not in competition with their free will. God does not force his way into a human heart, but he does work on it. He does pursue it. He does place people and moments and conversations along the path of every person being prayed for by someone who loves them. And those divine intersections are the answer to your prayer already in motion. The question is not whether your prayer is being answered, The question is whether your faith is patient enough to wait for the answer to complete its work. He said, pray with the confidence of someone who knows that the God they are praying to is more committed to the person they are praying for than they themselves are, and that is a remarkable thing to know. If you are the person who has been praying for provision, for a financial breakthrough, for a way out of debt or poverty or scarcity that has felt relentless for far too long, I want to give you the word Dr. Cho gave, in his own words, to the congregation of people who had very little when he began his ministry in that tent in the poorest neighborhood of Seoul. He said, God knows your need better than you know it yourself. He said, the fact that your need is still unmet does not mean that God has not seen it. It means that the provision is being prepared with a precision that requires more time than your urgency prefers. He said, do not let the unmet need become an accusation against the character of God. Let it become instead the specific content of a faith that refuses to be shaken by what it has not yet received. And if you are the person who, like me, has sat with this question, not because you are in a crisis yourself, but because you want to know how to hold on to faith through the waiting that still lies ahead of you, because you know that life is long and God's timing is mysterious and there will be seasons of silence you have not yet entered but can see approaching in the distance. I want to give you the word that Dr. Cho gave that first landed in me as a comfort and only later I understood was actually an equipment. He said the person who has learned to pray faithfully through unanswered prayer has been given something that cannot be taken from them, because they have discovered that their faith is not dependent on what they receive. And faith that is not dependent on what you receive is the only kind of faith that can survive everything life will bring. I want you to say something with me now, out loud if you are able, because I believe in the power of a spoken declaration, and because I believe that what Dr. Cho modeled for me was not just a theology to be understood, but a posture to be practiced. Say, my faith is not measured by the speed of God's answers. Say, the silence I have been living in is not abandonment, it is construction. Say, what is being built in me during this waiting is as real and as important as anything I have asked God to give me. Say, I will not stop praying simply because the answer has not yet come, because I know that the God I am praying to is not ignoring me, He is preparing me. Say, the prayer I have been carrying is known to God in its fullest detail, including the need beneath the need that I have not yet been able to articulate. Say, I choose to trust the character of the one I am praying to more than I trust the evidence of my circumstances. Say, the day my prayer is answered is already written, and I will not walk away before I reach it. Say, what Dr. Cho knew and what his life proved is now something I also choose to know and to live by. And say this final declaration with everything in you. Say, I am a person who prays, and I will keep praying because the God who is listening has never once stopped working, even in the seasons when I could not see it or feel it or prove it to anyone, including myself. Father, I come before you now on behalf of every person who has been listening to this message today. Every person who has been carrying the weight of unanswered prayer for longer than they expected to carry it. I ask that you would do for them what I have seen you do for others who refuse to stop praying, who refuse to give up, who chose day after day to keep bringing their need to you, even when the bringing felt futile and the silence felt permanent. I ask that you would give each person listening today a renewed understanding of what you are doing in their waiting, not a complete explanation, because faith does not require a complete explanation, but a renewed sense of your presence in the silence, a renewed confidence in your character, a renewed trust that the one who began a good work in them is faithful and able and committed to completing it.